Ever since the enactment of the Vision Hunt Decree, you are hunted. Through random chance, you had been granted one of the powerful gems in this worst of scenarios. You hid the accursed stone by swallowing it, but it just kept reappearing in your pockets. Your only hope had been the rebels of Watatsumi Island. Leaving your home hurt you. But every day you spent here increased the chance of either a neighbor snitching or a soldier finding it through a random search of you or your house. But also being fully aware of what would happen to you if you did lose it to them. It was thanks to a fixer named Toma you had been able to leave. The rebels were accommodating. However, you brought no fighting skills with you. Luckily, with your animal vision came a certain ability. Healing. Any wound a rebel would receive, you could fix. Admittedly, the process would tire them out, but at least they wouldn't die of their wounds. So you spent your days inside the doctor's tent. It gave you a routine, something to do. But in truth, all it did was distract you from the emptiness you felt. This war felt unwinnable, efforts wasted. Every wound you healed felt like you were giving false hope. Luckily for you, however, this perspective was about to be challenged. You had finished taking care of a young man named Tepe. The overly eager soldier fell off a large rock while trying to scout out an outpost of the Shogun's army. When General Gorou entered the tent, barely alive, being carried by two rebel warriors. You had seen the demi-human a few times while taking a stroll through the camp, but you never spoke to him. He felt so unattainable, far away due to your difference in rank. Thankfully, they hadn't removed the arrow yet. Carefully, you laid him down on a bed. The demi-human groaned in pain, and carefully you checked his body. He was covered in shallow wounds. "What happened?" you asked quietly. "Ambush," was the only thing he said. Biting your lower lip, you explained the procedure. Okay, my elemental skill will heal you. However, it will not restore your blood, and it puts a huge strain on the body." You gulped as you watched his body heave. He was desperately trying to not begin to panic. And honestly, Gorou was doing a better job at that than you did. "What I will do is, I will use my vision to heal the arrow wound, and the rest we will bandage up." You weren't a trained doctor, simply using your vision the entire time. But through trial and error, and some advice from rebels with medical experience, you picked up a few things. "This will hurt. A lot," you muttered as you placed a piece of wood into his mouth. "Ready?" You would definitely damage some of his internal organs if you ripped it out, so your magic would need to apply as fast as possible. 3. He blinked in anticipation. 2. You held your breath. 1. The arrow ripped through his flesh. It took you a lot of determination to not stare at it in shock. The projectile was serrated. Whoever fired it definitely wanted him dead. Immediately his wound began spewing blood. In less than 2 seconds you pressed your vision onto it. He gurgled, but the stone reacted, glowing in a bright turquoise. And then he passed out. The hole in his stomach, however, was closed. Out of concern, and to make sure that this had been fixed, you kept the vision on the scar the arrow had left behind, while you turned around and prepared bandages. By the end of the entire ordeal, his arms, legs, and chest had been covered in white cloth, and you took a step back. Your heart was still racing, and you were out of breath, praying to any Archon listening to you that there weren't any internal wounds you may have missed. War had victims, yes, but healing was the only thing you could do. It would destroy you if any patient of yours would pass away. Blushing, you wondered if maybe they could somehow get an actual trained professional for this. Gorou was passed out for 2 days. The demi-human awoke with such a nagging hunger that he felt dizzy. Luckily, you were just outside the tent, and you could hear his hoarse shouts. Quickly, you entered. "I'm sorry to trouble you," he said out of breath. "But my throat is on fire." You nodded and apologized. Quickly, you jolted towards the medicine cabinet that had been set up in the back. Then you mixed pain-killing medicine powder with a cup of water. Before turning to his side. "Here," you stuttered while blushing. "Thanks." He took the cup from you. And you watched his Adam's apple move as he slowly drank the liquid. Your general was such a handsome man. You couldn't help feeling a certain way whenever you changed his bandages for clean ones. He smiled at you. "You did a good job. I don't think I would have survived without you." You forced a grin, but it was obvious that right now you wanted to do nothing but frown. I don't even know what I'm doing," you admitted. He looked away. "What about what you provide to our men? You're doing a good job at keeping the morale up. Because of that, I wanted to talk to you for a while now." Your heart jumped at that. "What?" "Stop blushing," shouted your inner voice. "Most of our men have lost their visions. But you kept yours, and you show everyone what visions can do, and what they're for. Tools to use for the betterment of the people." You huffed. "Yet, you always seem so gloomy." His smile widened. "Since this is a once-in-a-lifetime chance for me, I'd like to request something of you." You gulped. His tone was chipper, but you felt the floor under your feet give way for a dark abyss. Metaphorically speaking, of course. "Would you like to watch the night sky with me?" You blinked. This was a strange request. At least it didn't entail you having to talk with people. It is very therapeutic, and it might help you reflect. You looked away. You unsure of how to proceed. "This certainly is an honor, General, but..." He huffed with amusement. "What are you afraid of?" Quickly you came up with a very believable lie. "I don't want your wounds to open by walking outside, and just imagine, the dirt." He laughed. "Okay, then. I'll be looking forward to watching the stars with you after I'm healed up." There was no way you could get out of this, was there? Who'd have thought that the demi-human could be so cheeky? It was only another 5 days of you taking care of him until everything was healed enough. And during this time, Gorou noticed something. He noticed your gloom, your sadness. But what he also saw was your kindness. And over these few days, he couldn't help but smile whenever he laid eyes upon you. And on the last day, he was no longer able to deny it. He had feelings for you. This night, he gently took you by the hand and guided you outside the camp into an idyllic field. A slight breeze was moving across the land. From your position, the two of you could see down towards the beach, where a lonely campfire was lit. Gorou lied down, and you followed suit. He chuckled lightly. Don't look so uncomfortable. There's no one here. Quietly, you pointed towards the campfire. A soldier was celebrating a birthday here. Earlier. But they returned to the main camp to rest. You made an uncomfortable noise. Why is it that you're always so distant to everyone? He asked cautiously. I lived in Inamazuma City for most of my life. There you just don't talk to strangers. He smiled and looked at you. Really? You nodded. It's caution, of course. The bigger a community gets, ironically, the less people talk with each other. He huffed in acknowledgement. Also, you paused. You were really uncomfortable discussing this with your general, but you simply had to. Also, I don't think we will win. Gorou's ears twitched. Really? You shook your head. There are so little troops on our side. We don't have, well, most of us at least, don't have visions. He shrugged. They don't have visions. They don't have visions either. That's the point of the decree. No, you don't get it. They have an Archon. You sounded desperate. How can we possibly stand against the might of a god? Suddenly, his hand touched yours. Don't worry, he said. And then he huffed. Probably heard this a million times, huh? You chuckled. You actually did. But no matter what, I'll be here to protect you. Not was you who looked at him, and your eyes met. You felt your stomach cramp up at the hormones your body was firing. The stars were reflecting in his kind, big eyes. This was the moment you remembered he was a demi-human. You somehow managed to smile. It was painful, but genuine. See? You can smile, he said. He was such a good boy, you said without even wanting to. Gorou made a noise somewhere between a whimper and a surprised hum. He looked away, blushing hard. Wait, did you just hit a weak spot? Sorry, you said. After a minute of awkward silence, he said, I didn't mind it, he said. In fact, I enjoyed... He exhaled. It may be a little too much. You grinned. Did Gorou have a praise kink? You rolled on your side. Seeing him all embarrassed like that made you feel a certain kind of way. That lit a fire under you. A fire powerful enough to, at least for the time being, burn away the pain you felt in your heart and mind. Shakily you extended your arm and pat over his head. His ears twitched. "Who's a good boy?" He huffed, feeling both mocked and yet strangely aroused. "Who's a good boy?" you asked again. I am," he said after a while. For a moment you stopped your gentle petting, and he took this opportunity to quickly roll on top of you, pinning you down to the ground. His hot breath cascading down your face as he hungrily stared at you. "Gorou," you stuttered, surprised by his sudden move. "I have been feeling a certain way about you," he said shyly. "The way you took care of me, the way you look at me." He blinked. "Tell me, do you want me?" You panicked, your little heart almost bursting out of your chest. You had never been in a situation like this before. I never did this before." Your voice were mere squeaks at this point. He lowered his head, your noses almost touching. His eyes, they were the only thing you could see. "Tell me," he whispered. "Do you love me?" Was the only sound you could make. "Say it." "I love you, Gorou." Without another warning, his lips touched yours. Gently. A mere ghost of a kiss that only lasted for a split second. Already he was out of breath. You could tell that was only a taste of what was to come. But he was patiently waiting for you to give him full permission. A permission you granted by placing your hands on his back. A permission you granted by placing your hands on the back of his head and fully pushing his lips onto yours. His hands moved from your wrists down to your hips, then back up your stomach before gently massaging your breasts. You moaned into him as your own arms now moved over to his perfectly shaped butt. Cautiously you grabbed onto his cheeks. You could feel his fluffy tail move from left to right in sheer excitement that he was completely unable to contain at this point.